Well, good afternoon and welcome to our new knowledge today. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us. My name is Sandy Ratliff. I'm with Virginia Community Capital, and we are delighted to be a partner in this program with the Washington County Chamber of Commerce, the Virginia Highlands Small Business Incubator, and the town of Abingdon. Our goal is to provide training and assistance and access to resources to our business community, not only here in Washington County, but we are reaching through other parts of the great Commonwealth of Virginia. This program is started in 2014 as a way that we could support the Washington County Business Challenge. By the way, we're making plans for our 9th year of the challenge. It's hard to believe. That will start in January, but it was our way to continue that training and nurturing our businesses to not only launch, but to continue to expand in Washington County. Just a few housekeeping things before I turn it over to my co-host. Today's session is being recorded for training and educational purposes and will be available on the Virginia Highlands Small Business Incubator's Facebook page, Virginia Community Capital's Facebook page. Also, we have a YouTube channel called New Knowledge that we have those all archived there. So you can see today's and probably close to 200 other sessions that we've done since we started recording these in 2015. Our goal is to keep the workshop within 1 hour time frame because we know everyone's busy. So with that in mind, we have muted everyone, but if you have a question, we ask that you please post those in the Q&A section, and we will address those at the end or even during the session. So I'm going to turn it over to my co-host today, Nita Farmer with the Washington County Chamber of Commerce, to introduce our presenter and go from there. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Sandy. It's my pleasure to introduce Anthony Farnham. He is a lifelong resident of Bristol, Virginia. He has worked in real estate with Matt Smith in Abingdon for almost 10 years and currently the principal broker for Matt Smith Realty. Anthony serves on the board of directors for the Bristol, Virginia, Tennessee Association of Realtors. Anthony is also an elected official, currently serving as the mayor of Bristol, Virginia. As the mayor, he also serves on the board of directors for the Bristol Chamber of Commerce, as well as Bristol, Virginia Utilities. He enjoys investing in real estate and being a landlord as well. Anthony obtained his bachelor's degree from ETSU. He enjoys sports. He and his wife, Amanda, have 2 young children, James and Juliet. It's my pleasure to welcome you, Anthony. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here to talk about a couple topics today. You were reading that very nice introduction, and I was sitting here thinking, wow, that guy must be pretty busy. Then I realized it was me. So yeah, I wear a few different hats. As you mentioned, I am an elected official, so I do serve right now as the mayor of Bristol, Virginia. So that's something that keeps me busy for sure. I'll say my full-time, my day job is being the principal broker of the real estate office that we opened not too long ago, Matt Smith Realty here in Abingdon, Virginia. We have about a dozen real estate agents. We're working with buyers and sellers every day. And you may or may not know the real estate market has been fast moving, especially over the past 12, 18 months. So that's been keeping us busy. And then another thing I do on the side is I'm a landlord. So I've invested in some rental property and actively manage that myself. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. What it's like in real estate, specifically investment properties. And that's kind of a broad topic. So I'd like to really break that down into 2 different categories. One way, the first category we'd like to look at it is if you are the tenant. Some things to look out for, some things to be mindful for. And then the other category we could talk about is if you're on the other side of the fence, if you're the landlord of a property, the owner of a property, some things to again, be mindful for and to pay attention to. So we'll jump right in. And if you all can help me anytime anyone asks any questions, anyone sends a message in for a question, just let me know. I'm happy to stop. So we'll go ahead and we'll let's go to the next slide. And what I'd like to start with is on the landlord side. So we could talk about this a few different ways as well. Let's say if this is you as your business, maybe if you're a business owner and your business is expanding, and maybe you're thinking about purchasing, say, a building for your location. And maybe this building is set up where there'll be multiple tenants. So your business will be in this property as well. You own the property, but you may have tenants next door to you, and you're the landlord. You're in charge of some things, so a lot of responsibility. We'll talk about that, and then also too, you could look at this as a way, a personal side of it, where if you're just as an individual thinking about investing in real estate, in some sort of investment property, becoming a landlord, maybe you and your family's thinking about getting into it. Maybe you've been in it for a little while, or you're just starting, or you haven't really started yet. Even that's okay. Just some things to be mindful for. So I think one thing that's important to realize is, sometimes when you see something on TV, it's not always how it is. So of course, the short-term type of investment property, the fix and flip, the rental property, everyone's probably seen the shows on TV where they buy a house and it looks just terrible. And 30 days later in the show, or 30 minutes in your life, at the end of the show, the house is beautiful and they're selling this house for a huge amount of profit. So that does happen. Not everywhere, not every time. A lot of the shows are, maybe you're in Southern California, which is a lot different real estate market here where I'm at in Southwestern Virginia. But it is something that can be done, and it's fun. It's time consuming. So we can talk about that a little bit more, but regardless of the short-term type of investment property, you have really the long-term type, which is your sort of your buy and your hold. Maybe you personally, you're thinking about buying a small duplex, nearby, and you're going to be the landlord, and maybe you have plans to own this property for the foreseeable future. You don't plan on selling it. And then as far as maybe you are a business owner looking for that new location. So it's expensive to move, to pack up, to find a new location. So you're really putting down your roots and you're going to be, staying for a while. So there's really a long-term approach a lot of times when you're looking at investment properties. So when you're the landlord, I want everyone to really understand. I've heard this term. It's easy. It's mailbox money. You just sit back and you collect a rent check. It's not really the case in my experience. Now, when you're actively managing the property, you really have to work it every day. There's lots of things going on with tenant relations, maintenance, a variety of topics, and we'll go through some of those details as well. But so it's definitely not mailbox money. It's definitely something you have to work at, but it can be a lot of fun. It can be a lot very rewarding as well. So I think, let's say you're going to be a landlord and maybe you're purchasing a property, whether it's yourself personally or for your business. When you're buying the property, you're thinking a lot about just that, what you're going to be doing with the property, if this makes sense financially for you or your business. One thing we try to point out to people to be mindful for is what's going to happen at the end. Is this a property that one day you're going to be selling? Is it easy? Is it going to be easy to sell? And, you look at some things like the location, the neighborhood surrounding you. So it's important, even though you're buying and you're just starting out, it's important to think about what happens at the end. Many people will buy an investment property and they'll finance it and they'll use rental income to help pay that loan payment. So it's important to know, if you're going to have this property, say for 20 years or 30 years or more, what's your goal? What's going to happen at the end? Is your goal to have this property, once it's paid off, to then resell it? Or is the property as your goal to keep it and to continue to have some rental income? And with that comes continuing on with maintenance and other various topics. So let's click ahead to the next slide, and we'll kind of get into the paperwork side of it. It's very important to have strong paperwork when you're a landlord. again, it's risky to let somebody else come and occupy a property that you own. Maybe on the residential side, or say like for your business next door for that property that you purchased, and you have some extra space that you're going to lease out. So I like to call it the 4 Ps, what you want to start with. If you're going to be a landlord and you're going to have a tenant, you need to go over a rental lease agreement and have something signed on paper, an agreement between you and the tenant. And the 4 Ps are really the parties, property, the price, and the period. So now to break that down, the parties are just you identifying yourself as the landlord and who the tenant is. The property, the actual address of the property, the price, the actual rental amount. And sometimes if it's a residential property that's broken down, and that's just a monthly rent. Sometimes if it's a commercial property, it's a little more complicated. Sometimes landlords will define that as a price per square foot, how many square feet that is, the price per square foot for the whole year, and you divide it by 12. So that's what the monthly rent is. So it can vary a little bit depending on what your style is. The period, the last part, is the time period. And let's talk about the term that I've used already, the rental lease agreement. A lot of people will use those terms interchangeably. I think it's important to know that when you're using the term lease, that sort of, almost like kind of binds you to a time period. A lot of landlords will say, I'm going to rent this property. I'm looking for a 1-year lease, a 3-year lease. It's important to have that discussion up front between the tenant and the landlord to figure out what the time period is and also what happens at the end. So let's say you have a house and you're going to rent it out. You're going to have a tenant in there and they sign a 1-year lease. I think it's important to have what happens after that year. Does the tenant have to move out? Does this lease become void? What happens? So for instance, a lease that I use personally myself for a residential property, I have in there that after the 1-year period ends for this lease period, the lease, the terms all continue on, and it just becomes a month-to-month rental agreement after that. So, and we can talk a little bit about that, the month-to-month and the as far as giving notices, because you want to make sure you have some protection in there when the time period ends. The tenant is going to give you notice if they're going to be moving out. And again, I think this applies to whether it's a residential property that you're personally investing in or a commercial property, maybe next door to your business, a property that you went ahead and purchased. So the time period is important. The price is important. Identifying who the parties are in the contract and the property itself. Now, there's a lot of other aspects that you can include in a rental agreement or a lease agreement between yourself and a tenant. In my opinion, I think it's best to be very detailed because you don't really want to get into a situation down the road where there's some sort of dispute and maybe the tenant says, well, it was not clearly defined in our lease. So I think this is what should happen. The more detailed you can be upfront, I think the less likelihood of some sort of dispute later on, if it's clearly defined at the beginning. So for those on the screen that you can see, we put maintenance. Maintenance is important. Who's covering the maintenance? Now, obviously, let's say you're renting out this duplex that you and your spouse purchased as an investment property. It's important to know that maintenance for, say, the heat pump, a leaky roof, a leaky sink, that's going to be something that's most likely on the landlord a lot of times. So that needs to be clearly defined. Now, let's say it's more of a commercial space where there's businesses. A lot of times there's common areas, maybe common sidewalks or common hallways or parking lots. It's important to really define who's taking care of the maintenance of this place. We help someone lease a commercial building here locally in Abingdon. Outside, it's a medical office. Outside, there are trash cans and the containers where people can drop their cigarette butts. picnic tables, and common sidewalks. So, the landlord has a company that takes care of that maintenance. It's an expense to the landlord, but it's important that that's clearly defined up front, because if it wasn't, the trash would just be piling up. The tenant would say, well, it may be the landlord's job. The landlord would say, well, I don't think that's my job. It's your all's job. So it's important to slow down as you're entering into any kind of a lease agreement to make sure that's clearly defined. Pets is another category. Most of the time, not really an issue with retail space, commercial space, but with residential property, it's important to know how many pets the tenant has, how many pets they're wanting to have. Some people have a no pet policy, which is fine. Now, the one way you can get into, a little bit of an issue is you have to make sure you're not discriminating. So if somebody has a service animal, that's fine. That service animals are a different category than someone just having a pet, just for their own pleasure. So it's you need to make sure anyone who has any kind of service animal, they feel welcome. They know that the service animal is okay. Obviously, smoking. Many folks, if you're a landlord, commercial or residential, you can say you have a no smoking policy inside. That's pretty common these days in many areas. Going back to some outside stuff, snow removal, that's pretty important, because I have seen leases before with other parties that the snow removal is not clearly defined, and maybe a tenant is saying, well, maybe it's an apartment building and they're trying to get out of the parking lot to get to work, and they can't get to work because it snowed a bunch last night. So they're complaining about the landlord. Well, the landlord is saying, well, that's not my job. So it's important to, even though some areas have more or less snow than others, it's important to put that in there. You don't want a situation where somebody slips and falls and the tenant says, well, this was the landlord's job to remove this snow and this ice, and now I'm injured. If it needs to be, it needs to be in there. It needs to be clearly defined who's taking care of that. Now, another important thing, a liability part of it, is if you're a landlord, you need to think about smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors. A few years ago, there was an incident at a hotel in Boone, North Carolina, and there was carbon monoxide. And unfortunately, somebody passed away. And then some time went by, and unfortunately, somebody else passed away. I believe it was in the same hotel room. That's an issue. And I don't know if there were any smoke or carbon monoxide detectors in there, but I know there was a big investigation. I'm not quite sure about the results of that, but there's some big liability. You want to make sure that if you're a landlord and you say you're going to provide smoke detectors in the building, you do that. You also want to be specific about who's going to change the batteries, how often the smoke detectors themselves are changed. They recommend changing the battery every 6 months, every time you set the clocks forward or back. That's a good time to have a reminder for that. There are some smoke detectors now they don't have a battery that you change. It's just a 10-year battery. And after 10 years go by, they say you need to replace the smoke detector anyway. So once that is done, you toss it and you get a new one. Now myself, as far as these items with snow removal, with smoke detectors, with maintenance of other items, it can get overwhelming sometimes. And, we're all busy with our lives, with our jobs, with our families. So it's important to stay organized. And some people have their own methods, their own ways. Myself, I love spreadsheets. I love to use lots of spreadsheets. So I have a spreadsheet on my computer. My wife says I'm a nerd about this, but I have my own smoke detector spreadsheet. So I have the property address, where the smoke detectors are, in the bedrooms, in the kitchen, in the basement, and when the last time the battery was changed. So I look at that spreadsheet often. It's just a way that I try to keep everything all together in front of me. And maybe it's not a spreadsheet for you, maybe it's a different way, but there's definitely ways to try to keep it all together. I also, regarding maintenance, I have an appliance spreadsheet. So I have the property address, the type of appliance, and then I have the model and serial number of the appliance. So if a tenant calls me and says, hey, landlord, my oven is broken. Well, I can take a look at my spreadsheet and I can find out by the model number and serial number, is this oven 3 years old or is it 20 years old? If it's a 3-year-old oven, you can kind of lean on saying, let me get an appliance guy to fix this. If it's 20 years old, maybe you're starting to think along the lines of it's not best to spend money to fix it. Maybe it's time for me just to replace it. So you can definitely use those organization methods, in my case, spreadsheets, to stay organized, to try to help. So when someone does call, I don't actually have to go out to the property to actually look at the serial number, the model number. I know already, yeah, that's a GE. It's 15 years old. Maybe it's time to do something new. So I guess overall, I just want to say, whether it is a commercial property or a residential property for yourself, being specific in the lease is important. Being upfront and having a good discussion, starting off with a good relationship with your tenant is important, and going over these things with your tenant to let them know, that you're going to take care of the snow removal, that you're providing these smoke detectors, but it's their job to change the batteries every 6 months. It's, I think the more detailed you can be upfront, the less of an issue you could have on the back end. So let's flip ahead to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about the other side of the fence here. So let's say you're not the landlord anymore. Let's say you're the tenant. So when you are the tenant, a lot of the things that I discussed already regarding being a landlord can also apply when you're on the tenant side of this. So things like just for instance, the lease agreement, and Sandy or Nita, if you can hear me, we can flip ahead to the next slide. The lease agreement is important as a tenant. You want to make sure you understand what you're signing, what you're agreeing to. And maybe it's, again, you yourself moving into a new house and you're renting it. Or maybe it's your business and you're expanding and you're moving into a new facility. You really want to be able to have a detailed discussion up front so expectations are understood at the beginning. Going back to maintenance of items, for instance, we lease out a property that is a medical office. So when you have a medical office that's thousands of square feet, they have fluorescent lights. They're wondering, who's going to take care of these the fluorescent lights. It can be a big maintenance issue. If you're the tenant and you think the landlord is going to be taking care of everything, you move in, and then you realize, no, that's an expense that you have to take care of. It can really affect your bottom dollar. So it's important to understand that up front. We talked a little bit about already on the landlord side of it, the maintenance of common areas like sidewalks and parking lots. Obviously, if you're renting a space, let's say your business has expanded and you're in a facility now, you want it to look nice. So when your customers walk in, you don't want them walking by a trash can that's overflowing, weeds that are coming up through the sidewalk. And you also don't want your customers tripping and falling on the snowy, the icy parking lot. So making sure that is clearly defined, it'll help you with your bottom dollar, but it'll also help the appearance of your business looking nice. So we can also talk a little bit about, when you're a tenant, about security. That is sometimes something that's clearly defined in the lease agreement, and that's a good thing. Maybe you're going to be renting in an office building where there's multiple tenants, multiple floors, interior hallways, multiple exits. You want to make sure, if you have employees working there at night, are these doors locked? Are these hallways lit? Are there cameras? Maybe there is security on staff throughout the evening and night. And that's a good thing. Security can also just be something as simple as the exterior lighting in the parking lots. You want to make sure your customers and also your employees feel safe as well. Now, on the residential side of it, making sure who has a key to your residence, yourself and your landlord. Well, were the locks changed before you moved in? from the previous tenant? Are there any maintenance people that have, access to the property? So there's a lot of little details that go involved with this. It's more than just the price and the amount of feet or the size of the property. When you're a tenant and you're going to rent something, again, this would apply both ways, whether it's a house or a commercial space for yourself or for your business. It's important to know about the duration of the lease, the time period. At the very end, what happens then? On the tenant side of it, maybe if you're in a commercial space, if you're renting something, sometimes the landlord, maybe if it's a big landlord, by I say big, not someone who's been going through getting the double quarter pounder with cheese a whole lot, a big landlord, like a big company that owns lots of properties, maybe throughout multiple states, what is it going to look like at the end of the lease agreement? Sometimes there's some wording in there about when this lease agreement ends, when this time period ends, it's going to renew for another time period, or there's going to be an increase in the rent amount. Sometimes if you're not mindful of that, not saying that a landlord's trying to be sneaky, but if you're a tenant, you can sometimes let something slip by and not realize that. And all of a sudden your rent amount is going up, and maybe you were looking at doing something else, moving, and the landlord is saying, well, no, this actually renewed. You have another 3 years on this lease. We agreed to this back in the beginning. It's important to be mindful of that. And I wanted to take a quick moment, Sandy and Nita, I just wanted to say, are there any questions right now?
I just wanted to let you know I'm having, I'm having computer issues, and I'm locked up on my laptop, so I'm on my iPad now. I had a question when you were in a previous side. How would some of these things apply if I'm running an Airbnb? Because Airbnbs are really getting hot in Southwest Virginia, because with the growth in tourism, there's a need for lodging, which, you know how it works. A real estate or a developer is not going to go into some rural area and put in a 100-bed facility. So working with individuals who want to use that investment, what would you suggest and some things that they look at?
Absolutely. And that's a great question, because Airbnb, nightly rentals, is still a relatively new thing. It's getting more prominent here in this area. And I've seen that in a few different ways in my line of work. As the real estate broker, we're working with buyers and sellers. We're constantly talking to lenders and home inspectors. And I had a home inspector who told me just recently, they said, we're doing inspections for buyers that are contacting us saying, we want a home inspection done on this property, but we've not actually been to the property. We don't live here in Southwest Virginia. We're just buying it for an investment property, for an Airbnb. So I've never heard that before until just recently. Obviously, with one of my other jobs being part of the city council in Bristol and serving as the mayor, in Bristol, Virginia, there are now going to be casinos that are coming in Virginia, one of them being in Bristol, a Hard Rock Casino at the former Bristol Mall property, which is slated to open in 2022. I'm very excited about that. There's a lot of people that have looked about Airbnb options around the area as far as investing in that. So it's exciting. It's kind of a new thing. A lot of similar things that I discussed recently still apply with Airbnb, such as if you own an Airbnb, a rental property, instead of renting it, finding a tenant who's going to rent for a year. Let's say you want to list this home on Airbnb and rent it out as a nightly rental, where someone could come in and rent it on a Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, for someone coming in town visiting. You want to make sure with your Airbnb, obviously, that safety is important. Your windows, your locks on your windows and your doors, smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. Now with Airbnb, just personally myself, I feel like it can be a profitable, type of business if you are on the landlord side of it and you want to purchase a property for Airbnb purposes. A little bit more work to be involved. if let's say I have an apartment or a townhouse and I'm going to rent it, and someone is going to sign a 1-year lease to rent that. Most of the time, the apartment is empty and the tenant will bring in their own furniture. Well, with an Airbnb, you have someone just traveling in for the weekend to visit, whether it's for business or for pleasure. Well, they expect it to be furnished, and they expect there to be a television, maybe with internet access and dishes and towels and sheets. So you, as the landlord, you do have some expenses with that. So maybe renting it out several weekends a month you can have a higher amount of rent than you can just renting it for the whole month, like a yearly lease case. But you do have some expenses with furnishing the property, getting it ready. You also have some expenses on the side of turning it over when someone leaves before the next guest comes in. Some folks, it's easy. Maybe if you have a house that you live in and you have like a garage apartment or some kind of separate quarters, you're right there anyway. So when your guest leaves, you're doing it yourself. You're going in and changing the sheets and the dishes and the towels, cleaning up. But maybe it's a property that's not near you. You do hire a cleaning crew to get in and out. So there's a little bit of work with that, a little bit of coordination. But I think it can be done. Being able to slow down and be organized with that. I know some people who live in a state and they have an Airbnb property in a completely different state and they never go there. They do it all, remotely with cleaning crews, booking it obviously online. So it can be done. It's exciting that it's happening more and more here where we're at in Southwest Virginia. So we are seeing more of it, but yeah, and I actually just saw, were there any other questions that had popped up? I think I saw
Yes, there was one. Do you provide the fire extinguisher?
Yes. I've heard a little bit of yes and no from different landlords that I've spoken with. I think it's very good if you're going to say you're going to lease a property, whether it's residential or commercial. If you're the landlord, you're talking about these are the smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors and a fire extinguisher. Here's a fire extinguisher that's right here in the kitchen or in this closet or underneath this sink, letting folks know that it's there, and also checking the date on the fire extinguisher because after so long, they're not good anymore. So staying on top of that is important to do.
Oh, and one thing regarding zoning, I know you need to check if there's a time frame, a limit. I think that's something in the town of Abington. There's a limit to how long you can rent out a short-term, like an Airbnb.
Absolutely. Since Airbnbs are sort of, I'll say, not taking off, but kind of newer in the game. The town of Abingdon, the town council has discussed that. Where I'm involved in the city of Bristol, Virginia, we're also discussing that because it's becoming more and more common. Obviously, you have an individual maybe who is wanting to have this investment and have Airbnbs. Well, maybe there are other, hotels or bed and breakfasts that are saying, well, we have to play by a certain set of rules. They need to as well. So some localities are enforcing when you're doing your Airbnb, the lodging tax that you have to pay like a hotel to the locality that you're in. That's something that kind of depends on where you're at, but you need to be mindful of that and the zoning. Maybe it's the town or city zoning where your property is. Maybe it's specifically in a neighborhood. Maybe you're in a neighborhood where there are some covenants and restrictions, or like a townhouse development, a community with condominiums. There may be something specifically in that neighborhood's covenants and restrictions that may forbid you from doing a nightly rental. So that's something to look at, especially if you're an individual and you're going to be wanting to invest and buy some sort of property to turn it into an Airbnb.
Okay. And from a commercial, standpoint, if I was a small business and I'm looking to rent or lease, first of all, what's the advantages and disadvantages to leasing and renting? And then the second thing was if you could share maybe the top 4 or 5 things that you really need to, as that business owner that's going to be signing on that dotted line, that you need to make sure is in that lease to protect you. Not thinking about the landlord, but you're the one that's signing on the dotted line.
Absolutely. So some of the differences between renting and owning, let's say if you're a business owner, I think the biggest question for me is how long do you plan on being there? Sort of about where you're at. Maybe you're in a certain town, a certain area in town. You're hoping one day to have a goal to be in a different area in town on a busier street, like on a main street. So maybe where you're currently at is going to be temporary. So maybe you lean more towards leasing a space. And it could be not just moving from one area to another. Maybe it could just be a square footage factor. So maybe you have a business where you have 2,000 square feet, but you think in a couple of years you're going to need 4,000 square. You're going to need double the space because you're expanding, you're growing. Maybe you're having more employees come in, or you have more product, depending on what type of business you're in. So I think maybe looking at that, if you think you will be experiencing growth in the future, maybe you do lean again towards renting, to being the tenant. I think those are some factors that I think of, and there are more. There are plenty of factors about why people would rent versus own. Now, as far as when you are the tenant and you're going to be renting a property, some of the things to protect you. Obviously, one of the things was what I mentioned about at the end of the lease agreement. Say you're signing a 3-year lease or a 5-year lease. Several owners, several landlords will have some wording in there. And I'll say again, not every landlord's out to get you, but some companies that own a lot of real estate will have attorneys that they pay a lot of money to draw up their lease agreements, the wording. And you have to be careful about, is there any wording in there about a lease automatically renewing for another term, or the rental amount increasing automatically at the end of this term? So that's something to be very mindful of. The automatic renewals, that sort of stuff, that can sometimes can catch you as a tenant. And the other thing I would say is, and we talked a little bit about just overall maintenance of the property that you're in, but also maintenance of common areas. We have say a doctor's office that's leasing a space, and as you pull in, there's some landscaping, and who takes care of that? I've seen a lease before that's not really clearly defined. So a tree, half of it splits and it's laying in the grass, and the landlord's like, well, I think it's the tenant's job. And the tenant said, well, we never discussed this. You own the property. This should be the landlord's job. Part of it can be a safety thing when we talk about parking lots and ice and snow. And part of it's just the aesthetics, having your customers come in and the property looking good. You want to make sure you as a tenant and the landlord are on the same page. And that's clearly defined who's going to be taking care of the maintenance, not just of the property itself inside where you're at, but the common areas, especially in the exterior. We have a property that's, it's actually the same doctor's office where, the fluorescent lights, there's the bulb that changes. It's a little different than changing a light bulb at your house, just screwing it in. There's also the ballast, which is an electrical part of it, which you don't want to start fiddling with that if you're not an electrician and you don't know what you're doing. So, taking care of the maintenance for that, that's something that may not be clearly defined in a lease agreement. But as the tenant, it's perfectly acceptable to ask about it, to bring it up, to request that it's put in there that the landlord is going to take care of this, or the tenant is going to take care of that, just so it's clearly defined up front. So there's less likelihood of a chance of some sort of miscommunication, misunderstanding, or disagreement later on down the road.
Anybody else have any other questions? Let's see. Can you talk about how COVID has affected landlords, tenants, and when a tenant stops paying rent, what the landlord can and can't do as far as past due notices or evictions?
That's a good question. Let's start with COVID. Just COVID in general really changed a lot. A few things with rental property, investment property. As the landlord myself, once COVID began, obviously we started, wearing masks and social distancing and doing things differently than we would normally do in our day-to-day lives. So as a landlord, I have a tenant who has called and said, something is not working with a dishwasher. So I call my appliance guy and they're on their way over there. Well, then the tenant calls later and they're upset because the appliance guy came in and he wasn't wearing a mask. Well, so there's some things that are just happening now that are so different, and we would never even imagine we would need to think about this stuff a few years ago. So making sure maybe if you have some handymen on site, making sure they understand the needs of what's going on, the wishes of the tenant. A lot of times it used to be the tenant would say, "Can the electrician take his shoes off when he comes in? Because I just cleaned up." Now it's making sure hey, can they wear a mask? So it's a lot different than it was a few years ago. I will say with COVID-19, one thing that has changed a little bit, and in my experience, this has kind of been happening already in the past, being able to find those people to help you. If you're a landlord, it's important to really have some good contacts close by to you. Someone who is an electrician, someone who's a plumber, someone who can do heating and air conditioning, and someone who knows appliances. So you have a variety of different repairmen, handymen, contractors that you call upon. Sometimes it's tough getting those people to show up. You have a tenant who's wanting to have something repaired right away, and your plumber says it'll be about 3 days before I can get there because we're so backed up. That's a tough situation and puts you as the landlord sort of in the middle because your tenant's angry, your handyman's trying to get there as quick as possible, but you're sort of having to be the middleman and make sure everyone is calm and on the same page and understanding of what the expectations are. Since COVID-19 began, I'll say it seems like, for me at least, for us here in our office, it's gotten a little tougher to get those folks to be able to show up on time in a timely manner when they say they will. And again, it's a variety. Whether you say it's a contractor or just someone who does just electrical, just plumbing, or just appliance repair, sometimes finding those people are really hard. And I think that's gotten a little bit worse with COVID. I'm not sure exactly. Maybe some people in those lines of work are retiring. Maybe some people in those lines of work are getting hired on with a larger crew, a larger construction company. So maybe if you're a landlord and you're smaller, you're just yourself, and you maybe only have a couple tenants, getting someone to show up in a timely manner can be a challenge. So COVID-19 has definitely affected the real estate market in a number of ways, and including that side of it that I just mentioned. Now, let's say you have a tenant and you're a landlord and someone stops paying or they're late on their rent. That can be a very tough situation. It can really eat at you, and it depends on, maybe you have a tenant who actually comes to you and communicates to you and says, "Hey, I'm renting this apartment from you, but I lost my job and I'm going to be late on the rent. What can I do?" And that's one scenario. There's sometimes the tenant just stops all communication, stops paying the rent, and it can really get at you, and it's frustrating sometimes. That's one of the worst feelings. Because I myself, as a landlord, I try to take pride in, having a good relationship with my tenants and taking care of the property, the maintenance issues that I agree that I'm going to take care of. So when someone gets behind on their rent or they stop paying the rent altogether, it can be very difficult. And there's a few different options that you have. I have had before tenants come to me and just say, "Look, I pay you on the 1st, but I'm going to be late this month. Can I pay you on the 15th? And depending on the situation, I've allowed it. You want to be able, as a landlord, to try to manage balancing being the tough landlord and being nice. There's a human side of it. Someone's living in your property, and maybe it's a single parent, or maybe it's someone who just lost a family member or lost a job. There's a human side of it in this whole business as well. you want to make sure you're taking care of your business. You have an understanding of the set rules and expectations, but you also want to be nice about it. I've heard people say that you don't want to be too nice though. So it's a tough balancing act, because it's true. Sometimes as a landlord, if you're too nice, you can get taken advantage of, unfortunately. So now I would say in all of this, when someone maybe is behind on their rent or they're not paying you, I usually refer to a real estate attorney for the best legal action to take. If it's that time when it's no longer someone is coming to you saying, hey, they're late on their rent, can I pay you later? It's just someone who is just going to not pay, or they're giving you other issues too. It's important to, I think, have with that collection of helpers that you have. Again, I mentioned having a good HVAC guy on call, having a good appliance guy on call. I think including in that is having a real estate attorney, that someone you can reach out to and ask questions to. The rental agreement that I use right now, there's some wording in there, different clauses, different sections that I've put in when I've just asked my real estate attorney, what do you suggest about this? And he has said, yes, add that in there. That's something that you need to have. So it's important to have someone, I guess, on standby, in your back pocket. A real estate attorney is someone who can be your best friend, who can really help you in those situations when someone stops paying. When it comes to notices, going to court if you have to, unfortunately, that sometimes does happen. And COVID-19 actually, changed some things. Obviously, for a while, there was an eviction moratorium, a ban on that. So that was different for a while for landlords, especially new landlords, people who just became a landlord, and then all of a sudden, there's something on the news about how you can't evict anyone right now. So really COVID-19 has changed some of this as well. But overall, I think having a good real estate attorney as someone you trust and rely on, and someone who gets back to you. On the tenant side of it too, I know I'm talking about having a real estate attorney as a landlord. Maybe if a tenant is late on the rent or not paying the rent at all. When you're a tenant, having someone who has a legal background like that is very important. Maybe your business is expanding and you're going into a new location, and your landlord says, here's our lease agreement, and it's 12 pages long and there's some big words. Having someone who you can call upon and say, hey, I'll pay you a fee. Can you review this lease with me and tell me if there's anything I should look out for? That's very important too on the tenant side, to try to protect yourself. So
I think the key, what you're saying though, is communication. If you, the landlord, or you, the tenant, communicate, let everybody know what's going on, I think it's a much better than everybody going on assumptions. And so.
Absolutely. Assumptions can work out not so good a lot of times. Overall, and I'll sort of speak on the side of it as being a landlord for a little bit, whether it's you're the landlord or the owner of a retail space, commercial property, or residential space. In the end, it can be very rewarding. It's a lot of work, and sometimes there's issues that come up. Maybe somebody calls you and says in the middle of the night, says, my toilet won't stop running, or my heat is not working, and it's winter. Those can be stressful, and it can take away time from your family. You have your regular job and you get off work and you want to go home and enjoy your family, enjoy your free time. And then someone calls and says, hey, something happened here. There's a pipe. I hear running water. There's water everywhere. What do I do? And you as a landlord, you sort of need to take care of it. You can't delay on certain issues. So, I heard someone say one time, someone who didn't have any rental property, they said, wow, you're a landlord. You must be doing well. You have rental income. And I heard someone else explain it as, well, if you have a house, you have a heat pump, you have a water heater. Well, if you're a landlord, and let's just make up a number, let's say you own 25 properties, you may have 25 heat pumps, 25 water heaters. There will be lots of maintenance issues that you have to deal with daily, usually. So, but overall, it can be rewarding because in a way you feel like you're helping. Maybe on the landlord side of it, you're going to buy an investment property. Well, somebody's selling that property to you. So you're helping that person out by purchasing that property from them. Then you're going to lease your property. Maybe you have a tenant for over 10 or 20 years, and you're providing housing to someone. Housing, or again, commercial space, someone who needs a space to operate their business or to live. So you're helping. And then one day you're going to sell that property, and maybe you're going to help someone else, a new landlord, a new investor, start out for the first time. So if you can have that mindset and help out along the way, again, sometimes it can be stressful, but overall it can be very rewarding.
Anthony, I don't have properties, and I'm not renting both either commercially or residential. But are you, as the owner or the potential landlord, do you have the ability to do a check on those individuals before you sign? I don't guess a credit check, but you can ask for references or anything like that.
Yes. That's a very good question, because I kind of skipped over that at the beginning. When you're doing a lease, you could definitely have a spot in there where you can ask for references. It's important, if you're going to be a landlord and you get references, to call those references, to actually use them. And then some people I know do ask for a credit check or a background check. That's something I know a lot of folks do. I myself, I'll just be honest, I'm kind of smaller myself for what I own personally. I do get a few references, and that usually helps me be able to find someone who I think will be a good renter, to get a little bit more background information on the person.
One more question, and then we're getting close to the end. I know a couple that lost their business in Marion last week with the fire, the antique business. That goes back to the importance of having insurance and keeping it updated. Now, you as a landlord, do you periodically connect with your insurance broker and say, I want to check, I've done this improvement, or, how do you keep up to make sure you're staying current and it's there when you need it?
Absolutely. Sometimes if you own the property and you're doing some work, maybe you replace the roof or you replace the windows, you can reach out to your insurance agent, and sometimes you can get a discount on your policy from what you have been previously paying. And I do have a section in the lease agreement that I use about renters insurance. So for instance, like my policy right now, let's say I own an apartment or a townhouse and it burns down. I have a policy that covers for that. But it doesn't really cover personal property inside. It covers the structure itself for remodeling or rebuilding. So I do have a section. I do have a conversation with my tenants about insurance and about how that they're required. They need to get renters insurance to cover their personal belongings while they're staying there. And I let them know that's just because my insurance policy covers the structure. They need to have something that can cover their personal belongings. And, renters insurance, let's say you're an individual and it's going to be a house that you're living in. It can actually be very, very affordable to cover your belongings. Many people don't realize that. Many people think, oh, wow, how expensive is that going to be? How much is that going to cost me? If you're a first-time tenant and you're going to reach out to a couple insurance agencies to get some quotes on renters insurance, I think you could be very surprised at how affordable it is. So.
Great. Well, I don't see any other questions right now from anyone. So I want to thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule to present this session today. I sure did learn quite a bit. And for those that are joining us online, thank you for your time, for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, this session is being recorded and will be posted on the Virginia Highlands Small Business Incubator's Facebook page, as well as Virginia Community College and Virginia Community Capital. I can't even remember my employer's name, as well as the Chambers. And we also have the New Knowledge YouTube channel that has not only have this one, but has a ton of others. Just want to do a plug for our next session, which will be on October the 27th, and it'll be focused on online payment systems, point of sales, that you can learn lots of tips from on that one. So again, Anthony, thank you for joining us today. And folks, if you got something out of this and found it useful, share the video and the resources that I'm going to be sending to you with other businesses and people. That's why we're doing this. This is not just for a small crew. This is for everyone in Southwest Virginia and throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I don't know if Nita has anything else to say. I'm going to say, oh, there she is. Wait, you're on mute, I think. I'm going to get a T-shirt with that on it.
I think I need one of those. Thank you, Anthony. What great information you brought. We've got a lot of different people that are moving into the area, as you know, and a lot of them are asking questions like this or wanting to have an Airbnb or purchase apartments. So thank you so much. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you all so much for having me. I hope this just gave a general, overall, broad view about many different topics we talked about. I hope it helped, and anyone is welcome to reach out to me anytime if they have any specific questions.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if you have like a draft or a sample of a lease document or anything, if someone wants it, if they can contact you or
Absolutely. Just a sort of a blank, rough draft. If someone wanted to look at it and use it, we've got a couple different versions we could provide, and absolutely any time I'm happy to help with any questions.
Great. Thank you. Thanks again, everybody, and have a blessed rest of your day. Bye-bye.